Hello and welcome to Procrastination Station. Procrastination as in procrastinating and that other thing that we all do. If you can put it together, then you're my people, and if you can't, perhaps click that next button. No shade. I'm your host Hannah, and I'm here to talk about self-sabotage in a way that invites all parts of us to come along for the journey. I'm here to lay out the setbacks and superpowers of self-sabotage in order to manage our limitations. Throughout the show, we'll discuss designing a life that works in your favor through sustainable creative practices. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed today's topic. Hello and welcome to Procrastination Station. Today I want to talk to you about rejection sensitivity. Rejection sensitivity is something that most of us experience. Everyone wants to be liked, and no one likes being rejected. That being said, as humans, we all experience this reality to different degrees. People who identify with labels such as ADHD, autism, BPD, and other mental health conditions may experience this at a heightened extent than most other people. If this topic significantly impacts your relationships, consider discussing rejection with a mental health professional. I am not one. This is my own experience with rejection sensitivity, and I do not have all the answers to this, and I'd like to actively look into my experience with rejection with you today. Although I've made strides towards caring less about what people think about me, there's still this big part of my soul that craves acceptance. Today, I'd like to explore the idea that two things can be true at the same time. I'd like to discuss this topic under the lens of hurting my own feelings in anticipation of rejection, authenticity culture, and how they relate to each other. Let's get into it. In terms of hurting my own feelings, I've noticed a pattern with the topic of rejection that people tend to experience rejection sensitivity in two ways. Either you're holding yourself back from reaching your highest potential in fear of what people might think, or you put yourself in inappropriate situations to reveal your inner self while hoping to be accepted. On a side note, another coping mechanism that people use that I forgot to mention is to reject first so that you don't get rejected later. This is one way people can sabotage relationships to protect their heart before giving them a chance. However, I'm more in the boat of staying in relationships long after their expiration date, so although I've rejected people, this hasn't really been my go-to. When I experience rejection sensitivity, it involves changing the plan preemptively to avoid rejection, which is essentially rejecting myself before I put myself out there to protect myself from the possibility that the world at large might reject me. When I was a child, I felt completely misunderstood, and honestly, I still do, which is a valid and real emotion. I projected the responsibility of this feeling of being misunderstood onto those around me when in reality, people are mirrors who reflect our inner world back to us. I was feeling misunderstood by others when I hadn't quite understood myself, and I hadn't given people the opportunity to enter my inner world in order to understand. I assumed off the bat that I would not be understood, which is not always fair to the other person. Feeling chronically misunderstood leads to constantly feeling rejected, even when rejection isn't present, and discredits others' capacity to empathize and ultimately hurts my own feelings before giving someone the opportunity to prove me wrong. I don't think it's fair to assume people are misunderstanding when they either haven't been given the full picture or you're asking for understanding on a problem you haven't understood yourself. Sometimes rejection sensitivity can look like imagined rejection. The biggest example I can see around this is when I make a statement or propose an idea and someone responds with, "Why is that?" Someone asking a question so that they can find deeper understanding is not the same thing as them rejecting the idea. However, when people don't fully understand my intention upon my first proposal of an idea, I immediately revert to default programming of assuming they don't understand and that they will never understand. The reality is, when people ask questions for clarification, they're actively participating in wanting to understand. In response to my childhood experience of assuming everyone is wrong and incapable of understanding me, I've gone to the other extreme nowadays and more often find myself leaning into rejection to imagine that they are completely correct. As I create this episode, I'm reflecting on this pattern of mine to find ways to more often identify a middle ground where we can both be right. In terms of rejection in business, throughout my journey as an entrepreneur, I have been rejected probably a million times, and I have processed this rejection in probably a million different ways. One major thing I've realized about myself through rejection in business is that I have an addiction to reinventing myself. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. I try to remind myself that when a customer rejects my proposal, they are not the right customer in the first place. However, this hasn't stopped me from going back to the drawing board every time it happens. The reality of the matter is that many things can be true at the same time. Rejection is feedback that I can use to refine and improve my offer to elevate my customer's experience, while not abandoning the entire concept in the first place. The person who rejects me in business may not have been my ideal customer in the first place, or they might have been, and what I offered wasn't what they needed at that time. What I'm learning in response to my rejection sensitivity is to collect more data around why someone might be rejecting my offer and to give things more time to receive either more of the same feedback or different feedback from someone else before I reinvent myself. Now for a bit of authenticity and authenticity culture. Our society is obsessed with the idea of hyper-individualism. I believe that the more unique we become, the more we realize we're just like everyone else. Authenticity culture, which we'll get more into with our next subtopic, plays with the desire people have to be completely unique and all of their problems are individual to them. There is truth and nuance to the idea of individualism. There's truth to the thought that we are uniquely individual, as even if you and I have experienced the exact same life, the same trials, the same tribulations, and the same wins, even if everything we go through is the exact same, there's almost a guarantee that we will process and reflect on our experiences differently. Something that you might deem as a loss, I might deem as a win, and vice versa. This is why when someone asks me for advice on something that we have both experienced, I always try and preface that although I've been where they are, we are different people, and what worked for me may not work for them. There's value to this idea because when we've experienced the same thing in different ways, we're able to offer each other unique perspectives. The nuance to individualism shows up in the fact that as humans, we all have the same needs to be heard, known, seen, and safe, even though what we want in order to achieve those human needs looks differently. One person feels secure in their identity with a spouse, a gaggle of kids, and a secure job, where someone else feels secure in their identity when they have freedom to choose what their days look like, to reinvent themselves constantly, and a group of people to listen to their wins and woes. We are all uniquely our own, yet we are all walking the same path in different fonts to the finish line. The beauty in life comes from the ability to reflect on your path with gratitude and pride while respecting the path of others with gratitude and honor for their individual choices. There are no rules to life, although there tends to be universal truths, even still. What's weird and quirky to some might be the exact flavor that provides freedom to others. Now, what happens when people actually and truly reject you? The initial feelings that come with this experience are usually expressed in two frames of mind. Either they are completely correct, I would reject me too, or they are completely wrong, I will not take ownership of their perspective. The trick is that two things can be true at the same time. Someone can experience you and decide that your flavor of life does not align with their destination, and your flavor of life can be exactly what you need to be free and whole. It's important as humans to hold space for more than one truth. Someone can be completely and totally right about rejecting you, while simultaneously you're completely and totally right about your choices. Allowing for more than one thing to be true at the same time allows you to reflect on your shortcomings as a person and hopefully grow from them while simultaneously validating yourself and honoring your choices. If being rejected still hurts your feelings after learning how to take it less personally, that's totally okay and perfectly human. It's okay to get hurt feelings when someone rejects you. The point of reflecting and growing through things like rejection sensitivity is not to erase the hurt, but rather nurture that part of yourself so that you can let go of what you wanted with peace and gratitude, and so that you don't feel the need to throw grenades into your life and ruminate on what went wrong. When you're being rejected, you're being asked to reflect on your relationship with both internal validation and external validation. Your individual experience being met with rejection does not mean you need to abandon your path entirely or that the other person was completely wrong. By reflecting on your experiences, you're able to refine and elevate your existence. By refining your existence through your experiences, you're able to validate yourself internally and become more of yourself. Authenticity, regardless of the external perspective, is a sign of inner strength where a person is free and capable to be entirely themselves, regardless of the external attempts to restrict, suppress, and reject. I'm no wizard genius at managing rejection sensitivity. If anyone who listens to this is and has some tips on how you can navigate your sensitivity to rejection, I would love if you reached out to me. And this means that you at one point had rejection sensitivity and now it doesn't seem to bother you at all. Some tools that I've picked up in terms of navigating rejection are mostly little mantras. The biggest and best would be rejection is redirection and rejection is divine protection. Also, what's meant to be will be mine, and what rejects me is not meant for me. Sometimes it can be helpful to imagine when someone rejects you that you dodged a bullet. And I think that there is value to this idea that, if that helps you sleep at night and helps you not pine over somebody who didn't want the same things that you did, then it's really great to not be able to ruminate. However, it's not so great to imagine other people as being a bullet. We're just all people. We're walking to the finish line, and there's only so much capacity that each of us has for various people. However, it's maybe not the best to imagine people as bullets, especially if it's somebody at one point that you loved, to completely flip the narrative to say that this person that I loved who rejected me is now all of a sudden a bullet that I needed to be protected from. I do think that it can be very helpful with breakups to imagine that your life, if you stayed with this person, would not have been the best. However, I don't think that it's a matter of the other person being wrong or being negative or a bullet. I think it's more so that the alignment was not there, where they can see a certain perspective around their future that maybe you didn't see when you loved them. And then by them rejecting you or by the relationship falling apart, then they're also protecting you from the idea that your life may have looked completely differently than what you imagined with them. I am challenged with this idea a little bit though, because I think that it ties back to what I was talking about in the earlier subtopic of being misunderstood, where sometimes people might make this decision of this future that they see with you that looks differently than what they assume you see with them. And I think without actually processing and discussing it together, like it can sometimes feel like they're assuming what that future you see is, because maybe you see things exactly how they see them. They're just not necessarily cognizant of this idea. I don't know. I'm rambling. These mantras of mine work perfectly in terms of asking for something that I can't have, or when someone who I thought was close to me abandons our relationship. The times that it doesn't seem to work so well is when I'm completely overthinking, hello 5 seconds ago, or when I've perceived rejection from someone who maintains a relationship with me currently. Perceived rejection hurts just as much as regular rejection, but when you have big reactions to rejection, it's not always as clear to the other person what's happening. Another example of perceived rejection, in addition to my earlier example of when someone asks clarification on your ideas, could be like when you text somebody a funny story or meme and they suddenly respond with LOL period. This is a subtle, albeit petty sign typically young women use to communicate that they're upset over text, yet sometimes people can use this same text when they're responding in a hurry, or even by accident. These days, texting with an angry tone doesn't typically get under my skin, as I've learned to simply ask if something's wrong, but it really used to get a reaction from me, as I had some high school friends who would fish for my reactions by using a short tone over text. Although I have grown to understand that you can't always pick up on somebody's tone over text and that it really should not affect you as deeply as it used to affect me. This is, however, an example of perceived rejection that if you're the recipient and you receive an LOL period from someone who claims to be your best friend, you could trigger a downward spiral within yourself or even an argument that could have been avoided if you kept calm and asked for clarification. For our last topic, I want to talk about the fear of authenticity in response to rejection. Total and complete authenticity is a trendy topic regardless of the way you experience rejection sensitivity. Authenticity is promoted as a way to find your tribe and to live a full and fulfilled life. This is very true. You can't find your closest, realest, truest friends without being authentic. However, I believe it's more nuanced than the way that it's being talked about. Full and complete authenticity all of the time is not entirely sustainable. Not everyone needs to know everything about me, and it doesn't mean that I'm inauthentic to have a side of my personality that I show at work, and a side that I show my friends, and then a side that I keep to myself, and then another side that I show my family. Everyone, in fact, has this. Authenticity can and should look different for everyone. That's what makes it authentic. But what exactly does it mean to be authentic? To me, it means honoring myself in every situation, but the way that I honor myself looks differently depending on the circumstance. For example, what it means to be authentic in a workplace environment looks different than being authentic in friendships, romantic relationships, and familial relationships. One way that I honor myself at work is if I'm given a dress code, then I like to have just a little sprinkle of my individuality to not go against the dress code, but let's say, for example, they want us to wear all black. Maybe I'll wear a charcoal top, or maybe I'll have some color in my makeup, or something along those lines. And I will make these little minor power moves until I'm told that I'm no longer allowed. And if you didn't know, I hate uniforms. I really hate being told what to wear, what colors to wear, etc. So this really helps me feel like I'm honoring myself while also following the rules. I can show up with a professional mask and be equally as authentic as when I show up with a mask to my acquaintances, and equally as authentic as the way that I am with people who know my heart, although each version of me is slightly different. I think it's okay to wear masks sometimes as long as you have people in your life where it's safe to remove those masks, and even if you don't have people in your life where that's possible, that you can look at yourself in the mirror without your masks on. The reason that I say authenticity is not always 100% sustainable is because I'm a weirdo in a beautiful sense. I love my weird nature. I love my quirkiness. I personally have some eccentric beliefs that I cannot share in a professional setting. One example of these eccentric beliefs is I have a dragon that lives in my mind and protects me from intrusive thoughts and intrusive people. This dragon is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to tell you about her. This dragon embraces my mind and creates an egg around me with its wings. The egg represents a two-way mirror where I can see out, but whatever is intruding on me cannot see in. The dragon is pink and iridescent and doesn't breathe fire or ice like a typical dragon. It breathes glitter. When someone is physically or energetically intruding on my personal space, this dragon protects me by breathing glitter onto the intruder. My opponent sees this as a beautiful cascade of sparkle, yet when they leave our interaction, they realize that glitter feels like shards of glass in their lungs. Have you ever touched something glittery and then the way it gets stuck to your hands and you'll find it all over you for like days? That's the vibe. That's the vibe. This is a representation of clapping back in a shiny way. Kind of like how people in southern states will say, "Oh, honey," in response to somebody who's saying something really stupid. And what this means to me is I like to always remain respectful and smart. And so when somebody's intruding on my space, I will respond in a way that is respectful and smart. And then they will leave the interaction feeling great. But when they get home, they will realize that I may have been insulting them. In terms of protecting me from my intrusive thoughts, this dragon reminds me that I am not my thoughts and that it's safe to look through the two-way mirror on whatever's intruding on my mind space. I can approach my thoughts without them hitting back, and the only way to overcome my thoughts is to hold to my identity with the kung fu grip of a dragon. As I mentioned, this is a coping skill that is very near and dear to my heart, and I hope I articulated it in a way that makes sense, because I know it truly doesn't really make any sense. But it's what helps me find the pieces of me that are authentic in spite of the mind demons that try to keep me small. Obviously, I'm aware this is entirely happening inside of my imagination, but I also hold the belief that just because something's in your imagination doesn't mean that it has to not be real. Yet, in terms of authenticity, if I were to share this skill in a professional setting, my peers would look at me as if I had two heads. They really, really would, and I wouldn't blame them, which is why I save these pieces of myself for my journals, for my own personal reflections, and for my very close relationships. In conclusion, as this episode comes to a close, I'm reflecting on a lot of things. The first thing that comes to mind is my experience as an introverted, leaning ambivert. When life asks me to be extroverted, I can turn it on in a way that people don't believe me when I tell them I'm introverted. I'm really good at talking to people, and I love that about myself. Yet when I go home, I need ample time to recharge after my interactions. I've also realized that although recharging, reflecting, and integrating what I learned through life is a great thing, I have also been taking too much time to recharge after my interactions. I'm also realizing that I really enjoy creating this podcast and creating in general, and my desire to go into my shell simultaneously feeds and limits my ability to create, which has led to a lot of inconsistency with the way that I show up in my business and on my podcast. With these reflections, I'm looking to establish stronger structures with myself where my routine can be more predictable and feel more secure in order to maintain a higher level of consistency. I'm also reflecting on my relationship with rejection to allow more than one thing to be true at the same time. I'm also reflecting that although I have freed myself from relying entirely on external validation, that it's still nice to have, and that I need to do a better job at validating myself internally so that I can consistently show up as the best version of myself for life's various and unpredictable containers. I hope you have taken something away from this episode. I want to know if something I've said really did or didn't land with you. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, come find me on Instagram. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you. And cheers for now. Thank you so much for being here with me, and if you enjoyed today's topic, now is a great moment to subscribe. If you have any feedback about today's topic, please reach out to my social channels. I help creative entrepreneurs market their creations in a way that feels authentic. I also sell content creation templates to help you manage your social media with unlimited content creation ideas. And I also offer one-on-one marketing consulting services. Check out my socials and my website to learn more. If you're interested in working with me, please reach out via email. So that's social media if you're reaching out for my podcast, and email if you're reaching out for business. All relevant contact links are in the description, and thanks again for listening. Cheers for now. That was pretty good.